I still remember the moment when I looked at my phone and realized I had no signal. My hands were shaking, not just from the cold, but from the panic rising in my chest. The snow was coming down so hard, I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of my windshield. Cars were scattered across the highway like abandoned toys, and I was just another vehicle stuck in what would become a 9-hour nightmare. But the only thing on my mind wasn't my own safety. It was 3:15 in the afternoon, and my kids were getting out of school in less than an hour. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. I kissed my 2 kids goodbye, watched them climb onto the school bus, and headed to work about 40 miles away. The weather forecast mentioned some light snow, maybe an inch or 2, nothing unusual for January in the Midwest. I'd driven through plenty of snowstorms before. This was supposed to be routine. By 10 in the morning, I was sitting at my desk, answering emails and sipping terrible office coffee. Outside the window, a few snowflakes were dancing in the air, gentle and almost pretty. My coworker Sarah walked by and joked about building a snowman during lunch. We both laughed. Neither of us had any idea what was coming. Around 11:30, the snow picked up. Within 20 minutes, it went from a light dusting to something that looked like someone had ripped open a giant pillow in the sky. The office chatter started to shift. People were checking weather apps, looking out windows with concerned faces, making calls home. By noon, our manager sent out an email saying anyone who wanted to leave early could do so. I grabbed my coat immediately. My kids got out of school at 3:10, and I usually picked them up on Tuesdays because they had after-school activities I needed to drive them to. I figured if I left by 12:15, I'd have plenty of time to get home, even in bad weather. I was wrong, so incredibly wrong. The highway was already a mess when I merged onto it. Traffic was crawling, bumper to bumper, with visibility dropping fast. I called my mom while I was still moving, just to give her a heads up. She lived about 15 minutes from the kids' school, and I wanted her to know I might be running late. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the worry in her voice already. She'd been watching the weather reports, and they were calling it a historic storm now. Forecasters were saying it could dump up to 2 feet of snow in some areas, with wind gusts creating whiteout conditions. I told her I'd keep her posted and hung up, focusing on the road ahead. That's when everything stopped. Not slowed down, stopped, completely. I watched my speedometer drop from 15 miles per hour to 0. Cars ahead of me weren't moving at all. I put my car in park and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. I turned on the radio to find out what was happening. Multiple accidents had shut down several lanes. A jackknifed semi-truck was blocking the northbound side completely. Emergency crews couldn't get through because of the conditions. We were stuck. I tried not to panic. It was 1:45. I still had time. They'd clear the road and I'd get moving again. I'd be late picking up the kids, but I'd make it. I had to make it. But as the minutes ticked by and the snow kept falling harder, that confidence started to crack. At 2:15, I called my mom again. This time my voice wasn't as steady. The call barely connected. The signal was weak, cutting in and out. I shouted into the phone, asking if she could hear me. She said yes, barely. I told her I was stuck on the highway, that I wasn't moving, and that I needed her to get the kids from school. There was static, then her voice came through broken and distorted. She said something I couldn't make out. I repeated myself louder this time, fighting back tears. The line went dead. I looked at my phone, no signal, no bars, nothing. I sat there in my car, surrounded by white on all sides, and felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Other drivers had gotten out of their vehicles, standing in small groups, sharing information and frustration. Some were making calls on their phones, holding them up high trying to catch any signal. I got out too, the wind immediately cutting through my coat like it wasn't even there. A man in a pickup truck a few cars ahead shouted that he'd heard on his CB radio that the highway was completely closed. No one was getting through for hours, maybe longer, hours. The word hit me like a physical blow. My 7-year-old daughter and my 9-year-old son would be standing outside their school, looking for my car, wondering where I was. They knew my mom sometimes picked them up, but not today. Today was supposed to be my day. They'd be scared, confused. The school would try to call me, but my phone had no signal. They'd try my emergency contacts. Would my mom's phone work? Had my message gotten through to her before the call dropped? I got back in my car and tried to stay calm. I turned the engine on and off periodically to save gas while keeping warm. Other people were doing the same. The snow was piling up on my windshield faster than my wipers could clear it. I watched the clock. 3:10 came and went. School was out. My kids were somewhere, and I had no way of knowing if they were safe or who they were with. Every worst-case scenario ran through my mind. What if my mom didn't get my message? What if she couldn't get to the school either because of the storm? What if my kids were still waiting outside in this weather? A woman knocked on my window around 3:30. She was going car to car, asking if anyone had a working phone with signal. I rolled down my window and shook my head. She looked exhausted, on the verge of tears. Her elderly father was home alone, she said, and she couldn't reach him. I told her I was trying to reach my kids. We shared a look that said everything. We were both trapped, both helpless, both terrified for the people we loved. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. The sky was getting darker and the temperature was dropping. Some people had run out of gas and were sitting in cold cars. Others were sharing blankets, food, and hand warmers. A group of truck drivers had walked up and down the line of cars, checking on people, making sure no one was in medical distress. One of them stopped at my window and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine physically, but losing my mind with worry about my kids. He told me emergency services were aware of the situation and working on it, but that the storm was worse than anyone had predicted. Multiple highways were closed. Thousands of people were stranded. At 5:30, I saw flashing lights in the distance. Police cars and snowplows were finally making their way down the shoulder of the highway. An officer stopped near my car and told us through a megaphone that they were working to clear a path, but it would take time. He said if anyone had medical emergencies to flag down an officer immediately. I wanted to scream that this was an emergency. My children were out there somewhere without me. But I knew he couldn't do anything about that. He was trying to help hundreds of stranded drivers survive the night if it came to that. Around 6 o'clock, my phone suddenly buzzed. One bar of signal had appeared, weak and flickering. I immediately tried to call my mom. The call failed. I tried again. Failed. On the third try it connected and I heard her voice. I started crying before I could even speak. She was talking fast, telling me she got the kids, that they were safe at her house, that everything was okay. I could barely process her words through my relief. She said my garbled message had come through enough for her to understand. She'd driven to the school right away, getting there just as the last buses were leaving. The teachers had kept my kids inside when I didn't show up, and my mom had signed them out. They'd been worried about me, she said, but they were warm and fed and doing homework at her kitchen table. I thanked her over and over until the call dropped again, but it was enough. They were safe. The crushing weight on my chest lifted slightly. I could breathe again. I was still stuck on a frozen highway with no idea when I'd get home, but my kids were okay. That was all that mattered. The next 3 hours were a blur of cold, boredom, and discomfort. Traffic started moving around 7:30, just a few feet at a time. Snowplows had cleared one lane, and we were being directed to merge and crawl forward. The snow had finally started to let up, though the wind was still brutal. My car thermometer read 8 degrees. I'd been trapped for almost 8 hours at that point. My gas tank was below a quarter full. My phone was at 15% battery. I was exhausted, hungry, and desperate to see my kids. By 8:45, I finally reached the accident site. Crews were still working to clear the jackknifed semi and several cars that had slid off the road. I could see the full scope of the chaos now. Dozens of vehicles damaged or abandoned. Emergency workers in neon vests directing traffic. The flashing lights reflected off the snow, creating an eerie, surreal scene. I drove past slowly, carefully, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. At 9:15, 9 full hours after I'd first gotten stuck, I pulled off the highway onto the exit for my mom's house. The roads were still terrible, covered in snow and ice, but they were passable. I drove 5 miles per hour down her street, my headlights cutting through the darkness. When I pulled into her driveway and saw the lights on in her windows, I almost broke down completely. I stumbled to the front door, and my mom opened it before I could knock. Behind her, I saw my two kids jump up from the couch and run toward me. They crashed into me, hugging me tight, and I held them like I'd never let go. My daughter was crying. My son kept saying he knew I'd come, that he wasn't scared, but I could feel him shaking. My mom wrapped all three of us in her arms, and we stood there in her doorway, a tangle of relief and love and gratitude. Later, after the kids were asleep in my mom's spare room, and I was sitting at her kitchen table with hot tea warming my frozen hands, she told me about her own frantic drive to the school. She said the roads were already nearly impassable, that she'd fishtailed twice and almost turned back. But she kept thinking about my panicked voice on the phone, about my kids waiting, and she pushed through. She got there with just minutes to spare before the school would have had to call child services or emergency contacts further down the list. She said the teachers had been so kind, keeping the kids calm, turning it into an adventure rather than something scary. I thought about all the things that could have gone wrong. If my mom hadn't gotten my message, if she hadn't been able to drive in those conditions, if the school hadn't kept my kids safe inside, if my phone hadn't found that one bar of signal at just the right moment. So many small pieces had to fall into place for this to end the way it did, with everyone safe and okay. The next morning, the news was full of stories about the storm. It had been declared a state of emergency. Over 3,000 vehicles were stranded on highways across the region. Hundreds of people had spent the entire night in their cars. Several had been hospitalized for hypothermia. Remarkably, there had been no deaths, though it had been close for some. The storm had dropped 21 inches of snow in some areas, with wind gusts over 50 miles per hour creating drifts that were taller than cars. Meteorologists were calling it a once-in-a-decade event, the kind of storm that comes out of nowhere and overwhelms every system designed to handle winter weather. I kept my kids home from school that day. We all needed time to recover, to be together, to feel safe. My son wanted to hear the whole story of my 9 hours stuck on the highway, so I told him an edited version, leaving out the parts where I'd been genuinely terrified. My daughter made me promise I'd never leave them again, and even though I couldn't really promise that, I told her I'd always find a way back to her. That experience changed something in me. I'm more cautious about driving in bad weather now, quicker to turn around or find alternate routes. I make sure my emergency contacts are always updated and that multiple people know my schedule. I keep blankets, food, and water in my car year-round. And I never, ever take for granted the ability to make a phone call or the kindness of people who show up when you need them most. My mom became even more of a hero to me that day. She'd risked her own safety to make sure my kids weren't alone and scared. She'd dropped everything and driven through dangerous conditions because family needed her. I try to be that person now, the one who shows up, who pushes through obstacles to help the people I love. Sometimes, when I'm driving on a clear day and I pass that stretch of highway, I remember exactly where I was stuck. I can picture the wall of white, the rows of cars, the feeling of being trapped and helpless. But mostly I remember the moment I walked through my mom's door and felt my kids' arms around me. I remember that even in the middle of a crisis, when everything felt out of control, there were good people working to help strangers. There were teachers staying late to keep children safe. There were truck drivers checking on scared motorists. There was a mother who drove through a blizzard because her daughter needed her. That phone call to my mom, broken and desperate, asking her to get my kids from school, was both the hardest call I've ever had to make and the most important. It connected us across miles of frozen highway, across failing signals and mounting snow. It set in motion a chain of events that kept my children safe and brought me home to them. And it reminded me that we're never truly alone, even when we're stranded in the middle of a storm.